The fire fades. As Gwyn is ruling and reigning over this world in the top position of power, he's tending to the flame that makes him powerful. We know this flame is important because we also see the other lords try to make their own. There is something unique about the flame, something that makes it your strength. And so, just like any other normal fire, the fire begins to fade. And with it, Gwyn notices the world is changing. The fire fades, grows small, and we begin to see the undead rise. And man, who up until this point, we see as what you and I experience, men living, men living, going on with life as normal, they begin to change. They begin to become undead. They do not die. We are told that Nito was the first of the dead. And so we are given the understanding that men in their natural state, when the fire is burning bright, die. We see graves, which means men die. Men can die. But as the fire begins to fade, as we've seen in Dark Souls 1, and is a huge story element for the kings in Dark Souls 2, and as we see the untended graves, hundreds, thousands of graves, men die. But when the fire fades, men don't die. And so Gwyn, who seems to be timeless and strong, sees manifest the very thing that makes him fear. The force that's contrary to him in the universe cannot die. And so for the first time since the beginning of what he knows as time, Gwyn fears. And while he knew before that the pygmies were powerful and should be locked away, now mankind's strength is showing itself. Man is undead. Even if he has no purpose, he still cannot be killed. Gwyn's response is to burn the very thing in the fire that seems to have a primordial connection to the fire. It requires souls. And so, in desperation, Gwyn burns his own soul on the fire. This shows us one of the most interesting things about Gwyn. Because while we, as the player character, see Gwyn as the enemy, and see Gwyn as a manipulative, evil lord, there is something also sacrificial in his very being. He wants his kingdom, he wants his people to remain strong and in power. And so, if our player character was of another nature, if our player character was a god, Gwyn would be the hero. But as a player, you have a fraction of the Dark Soul, and Gwyn is the enemy. And this action is evil. So Gwyn extends the Age of Fire. And here's the interesting thing. Here is another era that we as the player do not get to see. We get to see none of this era. We don't get to see New Londo in its glory. We don't get to see what happened in Anor Londo. We don't get to see tons. What we do see before this event is we see Gwyn distributing portions of his soul as bargaining chips, trying to control and manipulate mankind. We see Gwyn give his soul to the four kings, fractions of them. We see Gwyn send his knights to Oolacile to combat the Abyss, which is a contrary force to mankind. We see Gwyn controlling an absurd amount of stuff before this. We catch glimpses of it, but we do not get to catch glimpses of the universe in its glory. Only the downfall. And so, when Gwyn burns his soul on the fire, all he does is buys time. And so, New Londo, the city built on the ruins of Oolacile, as the fire fades, so does New Londo. Not only that, but as Gwyn in the fire, his soul burns on the fire and cannot keep it burning. Even his own city, Anor Londo, begins to darken. The world has changed. It's something different. And so, Gwyn's soul is not enough. With that in mind, the great power of his soul that even devastated the location where the kiln was protected and guarded, a soul that great was not enough to extend the era indefinitely. So before Gwyn did this event, it's clear that Gwyn understood that the fire would continue to fade, and he was just buying time. And so, he placed a lie in the hearts of men, a prophecy that someday a chosen undead would rise. Gwyn knew something about the nature of mankind, that there's something in man that can grow and strengthen itself. That man containing part of the Dark Soul has the ability to absorb and to gain strength, because souls equal strength. And so he placed a lie and a prophecy into the very culture of man who seemed to worship the gods, and told them that one day a chosen undead, a special one, would rise with purpose, would begin in the asylum, would defeat the guards that kept them there, proving their strength, and then would continue on this quest, his own guards removing the weakest. The prophecy told this chosen undead to defeat the other great lords, to take the soul of Nito himself, to gather the remnants of Gwyn's soul from the Four Kings, to take the soul from the witches of Izalith. Gwyn understood that his soul would not be enough, and so he told mankind to gather every soul they could. And so, the chosen undead rises, does all of those things, self-fulfills this prophecy, even traveling back through time, as we already learned is possible, that great beings can travel back and forth through time. Even collects the soul of the furtive pygmy, and then in the end defeats the soulless Gwyn. And afterwards burns his soul on the same fire and begins another age of fire.